Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I'm really glad you are sitting down with us today. We have a stack of documents on the desk here that, frankly, might change the way you look at that map of the world hanging in your church hallway.
Yeah, it is good to be back. And, you were right to set the tone this way right off the bat.
Right.
The material we're looking at today it is heavy.
Very heavy. We are looking at a topic today that sits right at the center of what the church is supposed to be doing. Yet, based on the data we have, it is something we are neglecting at an alarming rate.
Alarming is the word for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We usually like to start with a bit of encouragement, but I think today we might need to start with a bit of a wake-up call.
I agree. Because it deals with the Great Commission, but it challenges the popular definition of what that actually entails. We are digging into the book, Biblical Missions, Principles, Priorities, and Practices.
Specifically, we are focusing on a chapter by Brad Klassen that acts as a pivot point for the whole discussion.
Right. And we also have some very compelling case studies from South Africa and East Asia that put flesh on these bones.
So if I were to walk into a typical evangelical church this Sunday and ask, what is missions? 9 out of 10 people would probably say evangelism.
Without a doubt.
They would say it is crossing a border, learning a language, and getting people to make a decision for Christ. And they would not be wrong, necessarily. But our sources today are arguing that they would be woefully incomplete.
Incomplete is spot on. If you stop there, you have not finished the job. In fact, you might have started a job that is doomed to collapse. The central argument here revolves around a Latin phrase that the authors use right up front. Sine qua non.
I always appreciate a good Latin phrase. It reminds me of our seminary days. Sine qua non.
It translates to without which nothing. It refers to an indispensable condition. If you lack this element, you do not have the thing itself.
Like, oxygen is the sine qua non of human survival.
Yes. And the argument Brad Klassen makes in his chapter is that rigorous theological training for indigenous pastors is the sine qua non of biblical missions.
Wow.
Without it, you are not really doing missions. You might be engaging in religious tourism or temporary evangelism, but you are not fulfilling the mandate given to the church.
That is a bold statement. Religious tourism. That stings a little bit.
It is meant to sting, I think.
Yeah, but as we go through this, I think you will see why that distinction matters. We are not just talking about Westerners going over there to teach. We are talking about the desperate need to train local indigenous leaders to do the work themselves.
Because they are the ones staying.
Exactly, or rather, yes, that is the whole point. So let's start with the diagnosis. Klassen argues that the modern church has largely failed in this area. Why have we dropped the ball on training?
Klassen identifies 3 main causes, and they are uncomfortable to look at because they act like a mirror for the Western church. The first one he calls anti-intellectual mysticism.
Okay, let's unpack this. Anti-intellectual mysticism. That sounds like a contradiction in terms for a show that prides itself on holding to the Westminster Confession, but break it down for us.
It stems from a mood in broader evangelicalism that views head knowledge as the enemy of heart knowledge.
Yes.
There is this pervasive idea that if you study too much Greek or get too focused on systematic theology, you will become spiritually cold. You will be a dead orthodox believer. So the preference shifts toward emotional experiences, simple messages, and spiritual feelings.
I see this all the time. The idea is that the Spirit moves in the moment, not in the library. It is almost a pietistic reaction against structure.
Precisely. And the logic follows, if we do not value deep theological study here at home, if we do not think our own pastors need to know Hebrew or church history, then we certainly are not going to export that to the mission field. We reproduce what we are.
That is a scary thought. If we are shallow, we plant shallow churches.
And Klassen connects this directly to a low view of Scripture's sufficiency. If you think the Bible is enough, you study with everything you have.
Right.
If you think you need a mystical experience to really know God, you leave the books closed.
That makes a lot of sense. And that leads right into the second cause, which I found even more disturbing. He calls it deep-rooted partiality. To be blunt, this sounded a lot like a subtle form of racism, or at least a very arrogant paternalism.
It is difficult to read without flinching, honestly. The partiality lies in a double standard. The assumption is that established churches in the West need meat,
We expect our pastors to have master's degrees. We expect well-stocked libraries, and we expect nuanced answers to hard ethical questions.
Yes, but when we look at the mission field, specifically in the Global South or developing nations, we assume they only need milk.
We think, oh, they are simple people. Just give them the simple gospel. They do not need to worry about the hypostatic union or the intricacies of justification by faith alone.
Correct. We assume that less educated cultures cannot handle systematic theology. It is an implicit bias that suggests they are intellectually inferior or that their spiritual needs are less detailed than ours.
Which is just insulting.
It is insulting, and frankly, it is unbiblical. The problems a pastor faces in a rural village in Africa involving syncretism, ancestor worship, and polygamy are often more theologically difficult than what a pastor faces in a suburb in Ohio.
I had not thought of it that way, but you are entirely right. They need sharper tools, not duller ones.
Yes.
If you are fighting witch doctors and centuries of pagan tradition, you need a heavy-duty theological weapon, not a flannel graph Sunday school lesson.
Spot on. You need the full armor of God, which includes the belt of truth, and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God understood correctly.
So what is the third cause?
The third cause is one we are all addicted to: pragmatism and speed.
The need for speed in missions.
Missions has become a race. We want to reach unreached people groups, and we want to do it yesterday. The metric for success is often how many people raise their hands, or how many churches were planted this year.
Right. We want the numbers for the quarterly newsletter. And training a pastor takes time. It is not an overnight process.
It takes a huge amount of time. To take a man, teach him how to interpret the Bible, walk him through history, and shape his character, that is a 3 or 4 year investment. It is slow. It is expensive.
And it does not look impressive in a newsletter update. It is much cheaper and faster to hold a crusade, take a photo of a crowd, and claim you reached a village.
David Sills, whom Klassen quotes, points out that traditional mission tasks, like translation and theological education, are being jettisoned because they slow down the results.
It is the difference between building a tent and building a cathedral. You can throw a tent up in an hour, but it blows away in a storm. A cathedral takes a lifetime, but it stands for centuries. We seem to have traded longevity for immediate gratification.
And that brings us to the actual mandate. We have diagnosed the problem, but we need to look at what the Master actually said. We need to look at Matthew 28.
The Great Commission. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations. We know the verse well.
We know the English translation, but Klassen zooms in on the Greek verb mathetush. It is the imperative verb make disciples. It does not mean get decisions. It means to create a learner.
A learner. So the very root of the word implies education.
Yes, a disciple is a student. And Jesus clarifies what that curriculum looks like. He says, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. You cannot obey what you do not know. This implies a quantitative body of knowledge. It implies a curriculum.
So the Great Commission is not an evangelistic altar call. It is an educational mandate.
It is the founding charter for theological education. Think about the immediate audience. Jesus was not talking to a random crowd. He was talking to the 11. He had spent 3 years with these men. They were, in effect, the first seminary students.
They lived with him, they debated with him, they were corrected by him, and they heard his sermons explained in private.
And that is the model. If Jesus, who had the Spirit without measure, thought it was necessary to train his leaders for 3 years before releasing them, who are we to send men out with a 2-week crash course?
It is arrogance to think we can bypass the method of the Master.
It really is.
So Jesus sets the precedent. But then we have the Apostle Paul, and this is where the sources really dig into the strategy.
Yeah.
I was struck by the reference to Romans 15, where Paul says, from Jerusalem all the way around to Illyricum, I have fulfilled the ministry of the gospel.
And then he says he has no more room for work in these regions.
That is a staggering claim. He covered 4 provinces of the Roman Empire in about 10 years. Galatia, Macedonia, Achaia, Asia. And then he says, I'm done here. Time to go to Spain. How could he say that? There were still millions of pagans in those regions.
Right. He did not preach to every single person. That would have been physically impossible.
Yeah.
But he had established a hub. He had planted the church. And more importantly, he had trained the leaders who would finish the job. Roland Allen, a missiologist cited in our text, points out that Paul could leave because he was confident the work would stand.
Because he was not leaving a leaderless mob. He was leaving a structured church with qualified elders.
Let's look at how he did that. The text brings up the Crete model from Titus chapter 1.
This is a crucial case study. Paul leaves Titus on the island of Crete. Now, Crete was rough. It was an unevangelized pagan island known for liars and brute beasts.
Paul tells Titus, I left you there to set in order what remains.
Set in order, that implies things were messy.
Very messy. And the solution to the mess was to appoint elders in every city. But look at the qualifications. It was not just find a nice guy who loves Jesus. Titus 1.9 says the elder must hold fast the faithful word, which is in accordance with the teaching.
In accordance with the teaching, that sounds like doctrine.
It is doctrine.
Yeah.
And the reason is given explicitly, so that he will be able both to exhort in sound doctrine and to refute those who contradict. You cannot refute a heretic if you do not know theology.
You cannot dismantle a false argument if you do not understand the text.
There's a quote here from John Chrysostom, the early church father, that I thought was brilliant. He says, "The church needs men with strong minds and skill in the scriptures." He says, generalship is not enough. You need to be able to beat down reasonings.
Chrysostom understood that the spiritual battle is an intellectual battle. If a wolf comes in teaching that you need to be circumcised to be saved, or that Jesus was not really human, a sincere but untrained leader will be eaten alive.
He will not have the categories to spot the error.
Paul knew that for the church in Crete to survive, it needed warrior theologians. Even if they were rough converts from a pagan background, they had to be trained.
Then we move to the Ephesus model in Acts 19.
This is the part where I actually stopped and did the math in the margins of my notes. It blew my mind.
It is one of the most overlooked passages in missiology. Paul goes to Ephesus. He starts in the synagogue, gets kicked out, and then moves to the school of Tyrannus.
Which sounds like a place where a gladiator would train, but it was a lecture hall.
His lecture hall. And Luke tells us Paul reasoned there daily for 2 years. Now, in the Western text of Acts, there is a manuscript edition that says he taught from the 5th hour to the 10th hour.
That is roughly 11:000 a.m. to 4:00 p.m.
Right. That was the siesta time when people were not working.
So let's run the numbers on this. 5 hours a day. Let's be conservative and say strictly 4 hours daily. Let's say 5 or 6 days a week for 2 years.
If you calculate that out, say 4 hours a day, 5 days a week for 50 weeks a year, for 2 years, you're looking at 2,000 hours of instruction.
2,000 hours. I looked up what a modern Master of Divinity degree requires. In terms of actual classroom contact hours, a typical 90-credit MDiv is often less than that.
Wow.
Paul essentially put these Ephesian disciples through a graduate-level seminary program.
Precisely. And look at the result. Acts 19.10 says, all who lived in Asia heard the word of the Lord, both Jews and Greeks. Paul did not go to every town. His students did.
Epaphras, who likely sat in that lecture hall, went and planted the church in Colossae.
Others probably went to Smyrna, Sardis, Philadelphia, the churches of Revelation. This is the multiplication model. You train the leaders thoroughly, and they reach the culture.
That is the strategy. But sadly, that is not what we usually do today. And Klassen moves on to discuss the consequences of neglecting this. If we ignore the Paul model and the Jesus model, what happens?
The first consequence is what he calls missional infidelity. He references 1 Corinthians 3, where Paul talks about building on the foundation of Christ. You can build with gold, silver, and precious stones, or you can build with wood, hay, and straw.
The fire tests the work.
Yes. And if we build churches with wood, hay, and straw, meaning shallow teaching, emotionalism, lack of doctrine, those works will be burned up.
The missionary might still be saved, yet so as through fire, but the work is lost.
There's a terrifying reality here. We can work really hard for God, but if we do not do it His way, we lose the reward.
That is a sobering thought. We want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant, not, well, you tried hard, but the structure collapsed.
The second consequence is stalled evangelism. We think evangelism ends when the hand goes up. But if you do not train leaders, the church stays anemic. It stays on milk.
And eventually, anemic bodies die.
A church that cannot feed itself from the word will eventually wither or turn into a social club. So by neglecting training, we are actually sabotaging future evangelism. We are wasting the initial harvest.
The third consequence is the spread of heresy. This connects back to the global theology movement.
This is a touchy subject.
Very touchy. Because we are talking about impartial reporting here, and we have to represent what the sources say without taking sides, but the sources are very clear on this.
Yes, there is a push today to say, let each culture interpret the Bible their own way. And while we want to respect culture, truth is not culturally relative. When you do not have trained elders to guard the deposit of faith, syncretism floods in.
In Africa, it is the prosperity gospel mixing with animism. In other places, it is legalism or liberalism.
Klassen quotes Edward Judson here, the son of the famous missionary Adoniram Judson. He says, "It is a mistake to suppose that a dull and second-rate man is good enough for the heathen."
The worst off need the very best we have. That is the quote. It challenges the arrogance we spoke of earlier.
If the mission field is the hardest place to work, why do we think we can send untrained men or leave the indigenous church with untrained leaders?
We need the special forces of theology on the front lines, not the new recruits.
This brings us perfectly to our first case study. We are going to zoom in on the Limpopo region of South Africa.
The year is 1997. It is post-apartheid. A team from the Master's Seminary lands in Polokwane.
This story is a perfect illustration of the principles we just discussed. David Beakley and Charlie Ramphimedzi tell this story. The American team arrives, and honestly, they are discouraged.
They visit churches and hear preaching that is weak. It is full of prosperity theology, give money to get money, and focus on miracles rather than the text of Scripture.
They almost packed their bags and left right.
They did. They thought, there is nothing here for us to work with. But on the last day, a local pastor grabbed them. He pleaded with them. He said, "This is why we asked you to come. Our men have had no training. We need help."
That is the Macedonian call right there. Come over and help us.
It was. So they stayed. They established what became Christ Seminary. And this is where we meet Charlie Ramphimedzi.
I love Charlie's story. He was not a pastor initially.
No, he was a lawyer.
No.
A Venda man. That is a specific tribe in the north with a law degree on track to be a state prosecutor, a sharp mind. But God called him to ministry. He enrolled in this new, tiny seminary.
And there was a language barrier.
A huge one. Charlie spoke Shivenda. The seminary was in a region that spoke Sepedi. The classes were in English.
So he is navigating 3 languages to learn theology.
But he had that strong mind Chrysostom talked about. He graduated and eventually became the principal of the seminary.
The sources talk about how Charlie handled contextualization. This was not about watering down the truth. It was about applying it.
Right. Contextualization often gets a bad rap because people use it to excuse compromise. But Charlie did it right. He taught Christology, the doctrine of Christ, specifically addressing the African context of ancestor worship.
How does that look practically?
Well, in that culture, the ancestors are seen as the mediators. You pray to them to get to God or to get protection. A Western systematic theology book might not address that directly, but Charlie could show them that Christ is the supreme mediator.
He is the better ancestor, so to speak.
Yes, he holds the keys to death and Hades. He showed them that Christ fulfills the longing for protection and connection that they sought in the ancestors, rendering the old practices obsolete, not just because they are sinful, but because they are inferior to Christ.
That is brilliant. That is using the meat of theology to solve a specific cultural problem. But it was not all smooth sailing. There was conflict with the Baptist Union of South Africa.
This goes back to the wood, hay, and straw issue. The Baptist Union was the established denomination. But as Christ Seminary grew more rigorous, more doctrinally precise, and frankly more reformed, the union got uncomfortable.
They criticized the strictness. They wanted a broader tent.
They wanted to keep the peace, but Christ Seminary wanted to keep the truth.
Essentially. It led to a painful split. Christ Seminary had to stand independent. But here is the fascinating outcome. The alumni became the network.
The graduates of Christ Seminary went out, planted churches or revitalized old ones, and they started sending their young men back to the seminary. It became a self-sustaining ecosystem of theological fidelity.
They became ambassadors.
Yes. And now you have men from Kenya, Uganda, and Ghana coming to Limpopo to get trained because they know they will get the real thing there.
It proves that indigenous leaders crave meat. They do not want the milk.
That is the African context. Now let's shift gears to East Asia. The chapter by Jimmy Tan paints a very different picture because of the political situation.
East Asia, and we are speaking generally here to protect identities as the source does, presents a high security challenge.
You have communist or authoritarian governments. You have state-sanctioned churches that are often puppets of the regime, preaching a diluted, politically correct message. And then you have the underground or free church.
And the numbers Tan cites are terrifying.
They are overwhelming. In the U.S., the ratio is roughly 1 trained leader for every 70 believers.
1 to 70, that seems manageable.
In East Asia, the estimate is 1 trained leader for every 60,000 believers.
60,000. That is a stadium. 1 pastor for a stadium of people.
Imagine the pastoral load. Imagine the counseling issues, the weddings, the funerals, the theological questions. It is impossible.
Tan estimates they need 7 million trained men just to reach parity with the West.
7 million. So how do you train 7 million men when you cannot even have a public seminary building? When Bibles are being removed from e-commerce platforms?
You go back to the Bonhoeffer model.
Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Yeah.
Nazi Germany.
Yes. When the German state church compromised with the Nazis, Bonhoeffer started an illegal seminary at Finkenwald. It was not a big campus. It was a house. A small band of men living together, eating together, studying the word intensely.
It was low visibility but high intensity.
Tan argues this is the future for East Asia. Small bands of men.
It sounds like the school of Tyrannus again. Small, focused, intensive.
History rhymes. When the church is under pressure, it returns to its roots. But Tan gives 3 very practical ways we in the West can help, and one of them is a serious critique of our current habits.
Let's hear them.
First, fund in-country. Do not spend $50,000 to bring 1 student to America. Spend that money to support 10 students in their own context where they can stay connected to their local church.
Makes sense. More bang for your buck, and they stay grounded in the culture they're trying to reach.
Second, send teachers to them. If they cannot come to the library, bring the library to them. Western pastors and professors should go for short-term modules or long-term stints to transfer that knowledge.
And the third one. This is the one about the brain drain.
This is the hard truth. Ken called it sheep stealing. Here's the scenario. A brilliant young man from East Asia comes to a Western seminary. He excels. He loves the theology. He loves the resources.
And then a wealthy Western church says, hey, we need a pastor for our Chinese-speaking ministry. We will pay you a U.S. salary. Stay here.
And he stays.
He stays. And the church back home, the one with the 1 to 60,000 ratio, loses a general?
We extracted their best talent for our own comfort.
Wow.
Tan pleads with Western churches. Disciple them, love them, but send them back. Support them financially there if you want, but let them go back to the front lines where they are needed most.
That really flips the script on how we view international student ministries. We think we're being generous by hiring them, but we might be crippling the global church.
It is a strategic error. If we want to win the war, we need the best officers leading the troops in the most difficult sectors, not filing paperwork in the safety of the rear guard.
So bringing this all together, we have looked at the diagnosis, our own anti-intellectualism and partiality. We have looked at the mandate Jesus and Paul demanding deep training. We have seen the consequences of neglect heresy and dead churches. And we have seen the solution in action in South Africa and the desperate need in East Asia.
It circles back to that Latin phrase, sine qua non. Without theological training, there is no mission.
We are not just trying to get people into heaven. We are trying to build the Church of Jesus Christ on earth as a pillar and buttress of the truth. That requires architecture. It requires engineering. It requires blueprints.
It requires reform thinking, quite literally. We need to recover the mind of the church.
We do. And it starts with realizing that the man in the mud hut in the Limpopo Valley needs the Westminster Confession or the truths contained in it just as much, if not more, than the man in the coffee shop in Seattle.
Yes.
Here is a thought I want to leave you with, listener. Think about your own church's mission budget. When you look at the missionaries you support, ask yourself a hard question. Are you supporting spiritual tourists?
Are you supporting people who are just doing stuff?
Or are you supporting the builders? Are you supporting the people who are laying the foundation of doctrine that will allow that church to stand 50 years from now, long after the Westerners have gone home?
That is the question. The legacy of a church is not how wide it grows, but how solid its foundation remains.
Thank you for diving into this with us. It is a heavy topic, but a necessary one. We hope this challenges you to look at the Great Commission with fresh eyes, not just as a call to go, but as a call to teach.
Ideally to teach them to observe all that he commanded.
That is the goal. Until next time, keep thinking.